Chapter 16. Varieties of the Gold Standard. 1. The Gold Coin Standard. Characteristics and Historical Context. The gold coin standard, often called the gold species standard, represents the classical and most tangible form of the system. In this era, gold was not just a reserve held in a distant vault, it was a circulating medium of exchange. A citizen in San Francisco, London, or Berlin could carry actual gold coins in their waistcoat: the American double eagle, the British sovereign, the French Napoleon. This was the era of hard money in its most literal sense, where the value of the currency and the material of the coin were one and the same. The defining characteristic of this standard was direct circulation. The public had the right to bring gold bullion to the national mint and have it coined for free, or for a nominal seigniorage fee. Conversely, anyone could melt down their coins to use the gold for industrial purposes without losing value, because the coin contained the exact weight of gold it claimed to represent. This created a profound psychological link between the individual and the state. The trust was not in the government's signature on a piece of paper, but in the physical density and purity of the metal in one's hand. The gold coin standard provided the highest level of protection against government overreach. Since a large portion of the money supply was physically held by the people, a government could not easily manipulate the currency or trigger massive inflation, forcing the state back into fiscal discipline. However, this system was also the most expensive to maintain. It required a vast amount of physical gold to be constantly in motion, subjected to the wear and tear of daily trade and the risk of being lost or hoarded. It was the luxury standard of the 19th century, a system of absolute transparency and physical honesty that would eventually prove too rigid for the total wars and massive industrial expansions of the 20th century. 2. The gold exchange standard, principles and international use. As the 20th century approached, the sheer volume of global trade began to outpace the physical supply of gold coins. To solve this, many nations, particularly those in Asia, South America, and the colonies of Europe, adopted the gold exchange standard. Unlike the gold coin standard, where gold physically circulated in the streets, this system was based on a proxy relationship. Under this regime, a country would not keep its primary reserves in gold bars, but in the currency of a gold center country, usually the British pound sterling or the US dollar. The mechanism was a masterclass in financial leverage. A nation like India or the Philippines would fix their local currency, the rupee or the peso, to the pound or dollar at a permanent rate. The local government promised that their paper money could be exchanged not for physical gold on the spot, but for a bill of exchange payable in gold in London or New York. This meant that a nation could enjoy the stability and prestige of the gold standard without the massive expense of hauling, guarding, and minting tons of physical metal. It was a gold standard by association, turning the British pound into a global reserve currency that was as good as gold itself. While the gold exchange standard was highly efficient, it introduced a new layer of geopolitical dependency. The stability of the peripheral nation now rested entirely on the creditworthiness and gold reserves of the central nation. If London's banks faced a crisis, the shockwaves would immediately shatter the economies of every nation pegged to the pound. This marked the first step toward the dematerialization of money. Gold was no longer a coin in your pocket. It was an entry in a ledger in a distant imperial capital. It allowed the global economy to grow faster than ever before, but it created a delicate, pyramided structure where the world's wealth was built upon a narrowing foundation of actual physical gold. 3. The Gold Bullion Standard, Economy of Metal and Reserve Management. Following the upheavals of the early 20th century, even the wealthiest nations began to realize that letting the public carry gold coins was a wasteful use of a strategic resource. This led to the rise of the gold bullion standard. In this version of the system, gold remained the legal backing of the currency, but the gold coin effectively vanished from daily life. The government or central bank would no longer mint small coins for the public. Instead, they kept their gold in the form of massive standardized 400-ounce bars, the good delivery bars still used today. The crucial characteristic of the gold bullion standard was the high threshold of convertibility. While the law stated that paper money was still convertible to gold, the central bank would only fulfill that promise if you brought in enough paper money to buy an entire bullion bar, a sum far beyond the reach of the average citizen. This effectively democratized the standard, but aristocratized the metal. It ensured that gold only moved in large quantities for international trade settlements between banks and governments, while the domestic economy functioned entirely on token paper and base metal coins. The gold bullion standard was an act of economic conservation. By concentrating gold in central vaults, the state could support a much larger supply of paper credit and bank deposits. It turned gold into a strategic reserve, a weapon of national defense and international diplomacy rather than a tool for buying bread. However, by removing gold from the hands of the people, the state also removed the public veto. Without the threat of a daily gold drain by ordinary citizens, governments gained more freedom to manipulate the money supply, a power that would eventually lead to the massive inflations of the post-war era. 4. Pyramiding reserves, the weaknesses of modern systems. As the gold standard evolved into its exchange and bullion forms, it gave birth to a dangerous phenomenon known as pyramiding. In the classical gold coin era, a dollar was a dollar because it was gold. However, under the new efficiency models, a vast pyramid of credit was built upon an increasingly tiny apex of physical metal. Banks began to hold only a small fraction of gold against their deposits, and nations on the gold exchange standard counted their claims on London or New York as if they were the metal itself. This meant that the same bar of gold in a Bank of England vault was being used simultaneously to back the British pound, the Indian rupee, and perhaps a commercial loan in Australia. This system was incredibly efficient for fueling the Industrial Revolution, but it was psychologically fragile. It relied entirely on simultaneous trust. As long as everyone believed the gold was there, the system worked. But if every nation and every depositor demanded their physical gold at the same time, the pyramid would instantly collapse. By 1914, the golden anchor had become a golden thread, stretched so thin that it could no longer hold the weight of global geopolitical tension. The economy of metal had turned the gold standard into a giant game of musical chairs, where there were 100 claimants for every single ounce of bullion. 5. The Genoa Conference and post-World War I monetary cooperation. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 acted as a financial apocalypse, forcing every major power except the U.S. to suspend gold convertibility to fund the slaughter. When the smoke cleared in 1918, the world was drowning in paper debt and hyperinflation. The Genoa Conference of 1922 was the first great international attempt to rebuild the Temple of Gold in a shattered world. Leaders from 34 nations gathered in Italy to design a new system of monetary cooperation. They realized that the old gold coin standard was dead. There simply wasn't enough gold left to back the mountain of wartime paper. The Genoa vision formalized the gold exchange standard as the global norm. It urged central banks to coordinate their interest rates and to hold each other's currencies as reserves instead of competing for physical gold. It was the birth of the Central Bankers Club. However, this cooperation was built on sand. While the conference aimed for stability, it actually institutionalized the very pyramiding that had made the pre-war system so brittle. Nations returned to gold at pre-war parities that didn't reflect their new economic realities, a move of immense pride but fatal logic. Genoa was a valiant ghost story. It attempted to resurrect the 19th century certainty of gold in a 20th century world of radical politics and unstable credit. The standard had been rebuilt, but the gold was missing from the hearts of the men who managed it.